A phone rings. Trump listens, then slams it down. Scott Bessent has just issued a threat to Europe. Not with missiles or embargoes, but with math. His warning: any country buying Russian oil through China will face a 100% secondary tariff. This wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was broadcast openly on CNBC, straight from the U.S. Treasury. With one statement, Bessent turned a bilateral trade dispute into a global compliance test, not just for China, but for India, Germany, the G7, and every economy trying to secure energy through Beijing's industrial grid. 8 hours later, the Yarlung-Tsangpo River thundered. 5 newly synchronized hydroelectric dams in Tibet surged to full capacity, generating more than 300 million megawatt hours, triple the output of the Three Gorges Dam. Beijing didn't flinch. It flipped the switch. Bloomberg reports these dams alone will generate more clean energy than the entire nation of Poland. The move wasn't reactive. It was coordinated. A geopolitical sanctions threat was answered with a geoelectric counterstrike. China currently imports 2.2 million barrels of Russian crude per day, a 16% increase year over year. According to Reuters, imports from Iran, also sanctioned, have quietly risen as well. Beijing isn't concealing this. It's expanding it. Yet from Bessent's podium, this isn't legitimate trade. It's collusion. He frames the chain as complicit. Oil in, chips out, with Europe now expected to join Washington's enforcement. The contradiction is stark. Washington claims to defend the global order by threatening it. China, by contrast, asserts its position clearly. In a statement to the South China Morning Post, the Chinese embassy in Washington called U.S. sanctions illegally extraterritorial, insisting its trade with Russia and Iran conforms to international law and harms no third party. The logic is defensible, though imperfect. Oil is fungible. Redirected flows still fund sanctioned regimes. Yet the principle invoked, sovereign trade, is the same one the U.S. cites when defending its own exports. Bessent's strategy goes further than tariffs. He's pressing the G7 to wall off Chinese supply chains entirely, not just sanctioning direct trade, but punishing allies like Germany, France, and Italy if they refuse to comply. The Wall Street Journal highlights the leverage. Europe exports over $67 billion in cars and $130 billion in pharmaceuticals and metals to the U.S. each year. In return, America exports just $70 billion to Europe. The imbalance is obvious, and Bessent is using it as economic blackmail. But here's the twist. China doesn't ship everything directly anymore. Bloomberg Economics notes that 70% of Chinese exports to the U.S. now route through third countries, Vietnam, Mexico, even Canada, obscuring origins behind new flags. To close the loophole, Bessent wants blanket tariffs on entire nations, punishing not only those who import Chinese goods, but those who fail to reject them. If implemented, the policy would threaten more than 2% of China's GDP and ensnare allies like Japan, Korea, and Mexico in a dragnet. The fallout wouldn't come from bombs, but from customs forms. And the contradiction deepens. Targeting China means inflating U.S. prices at home. The Congressional Budget Office has already found that consumers bore the brunt of Trump's previous tariffs, paying billions more in hidden taxes. Duties filled Treasury coffers, but drained household budgets. This exposes the second paradox. Tariffs meant to shield U.S. industry actually punish U.S. demand. The Financial Times has shown that the bulk of Trump's 30% import taxes fell not on Chinese exporters, but on American consumers. Tariffs are effectively domestic taxes, disguised as foreign punishment. Meanwhile, Trump's latest tax bill adds $3.4 trillion to the deficit over the next decade, according to the nonpartisan CBO. The bulk of the cuts benefit corporations and high-income earners. Programs like Medicaid, food assistance, and renewable energy credits are slashed. 10 million Americans are projected to lose health coverage by 2034. Yet the same administration insists it is protecting working families from global competition. The contradiction here isn't ideological, it's structural. So let's reset. The U.S. is demanding that China stop buying oil from regimes Washington itself cannot restrain. To enforce this, it threatens allies who are essential to containing Beijing's rise. Punishing them risks driving them closer to China. In trying to isolate Beijing, Washington risks isolating itself. And while this plays out, China builds. The Yarlung-Tsangpo Dam network is not metaphorical power, it's literal. Planners say its output exceeds 300 terawatt-hours annually, nearly one-third of Europe's total wind and solar generation. The energy doesn't just fuel factories. It powers semiconductor foundries. In May 2025, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang visited Beijing. Not for politics, but for access. China remains the world's largest AI market, and AI chips don't run on ideology. They run on electricity. China's grid is scaling faster than any in the West. In 2024, it produced more than 10,200 terawatt-hours of electricity, over twice the U.S. total. According to IEA data, they're far from finished. New hydropower dams, solar farms in Xinjiang, and nuclear expansion are rapidly stacking capacity. By 2030, China could command the cheapest industrial power on the planet, a silent weapon in global competition. According to Bloomberg NEF, China's green energy investment hit $890 billion in 2024, more than the next 10 countries combined. The strategy is simple. Secure the lowest input costs now. Dominate global manufacturing later. While Washington piles on sanctions, Beijing drives down unit costs. One side shuffles paperwork, the other builds turbines, and markets are taking notice. Shares in Chinese cement makers, steel producers, and grid suppliers have surged 30 to 70% since January. Traders are betting on a domestic spending boom tied to dams, grids, and industrial upgrades. Iron ore is climbing. Steel rebar futures hit 6-month highs. This isn't speculation, it's allocation. Beijing's stimulus is already moving through contracts, steel, and cement. Compare that with Washington's tariffs routed through Vietnam, a policy that punishes allies, fuels inflation at home, and still fails to slow China. Because the real decoupling didn't happen on trade routes, it happened in power generation. The U.S. built a global trade architecture and now finds itself sanctioning its own blueprint. Even the semiconductor fight shows the contradiction. Washington blocked advanced chips, but Bloomberg reports Chinese firms ramping up domestic AI accelerators in 2025. They're not NVIDIA yet, but they're scaling fast. As one U.S. analyst told the FT, it's like watching someone build a slower Ferrari, but build 10 million of them. Meanwhile, China's GDP grew 5.4% in Q2, outpacing every G7 economy. Much of that growth came from EVs, robotics, and 3D printing, industries powered by cheap electricity and state coordination. The U.S., by contrast, shrank 0.3% in Q1, faces uncertainty in Q2, and is staring down a government shutdown as rising rates choke investment and credit. This isn't ideology, it's math. The CBO estimates Trump's tax cut slashed $4.5 trillion in revenue, while cutting only $1.1 trillion in spending, leaving a $3.4 trillion hole. With interest, watchdogs say the real figure could reach $4.1 trillion. In short, America is borrowing against its future to tariff its present, while China is laying the infrastructure for its next decade. Bloomberg Economics estimates U.S. efforts to police third-country transshipments could cut 70% of China's U.S.-bound exports. But it would also disrupt $300 billion in trade with allies, massive collateral damage for a strategy with little to show. In the meantime, Beijing is converting its energy edge into industrial leverage. And here's the twist. Washington demands China play by rules the U.S. no longer follows. It insists on free trade while rewriting laws. It condemns subsidies while enacting tax breaks that enrich elites and weaken demand. It punishes Beijing for buying Russian oil while importing metals from the same network. And it calls this leadership. Besant's real opponent may not be China, but time itself. By forcing confrontation now, he's trying to stall an energy-powered shift already underway. Beijing's turbines are spinning, its GDP is climbing, and its factories are preparing for a post-tariff world. The West can sanction trade, but it can't embargo scale. What do you think?